When we get married, Emily told me, even if we don't have any children, she will love me forever, but 7 years later, she was pregnant with someone else's child. And she was living with that person in the baby-ready villa she had carefully prepared. By the time I found out, Emily's belly was already visibly big. She was about to give birth. She was only panicked for a moment. And then she hid the man behind her. Daniel, didn't you say you couldn't have children because of a vasectomy problem? With this baby, the Johnson family will have an heir. You won't have to suffer anymore. We'll be just like before. Nothing will change. I was holding the medical report in my hands. I was so happy that I could cry. The day Emily was about to give birth, I went for a vasectomy. I also left a divorce agreement. Then I went to another country. On the day when I was confirmed to be able to have the operation, I went to the child care villa that Emily had prepared 7 years ago. I never thought I'd see my wife with another man here. She was completely absorbed in her work. Emily was wearing the clothes I had specially prepared for her. Her belly was high and round. The man gently stroked her pregnant belly. His face was full of tenderness. My head exploded. I was stunned. When Emily saw me, her face instantly turned pale. The man looked up in confusion. When he saw me, he was also shocked. After Emily realized and motioned to the man to go back inside first, then she came over and took my hand. She was dressed very lightly, and her hand was cold, although her face looked calm. Her trembling hand betrayed her inner tension. We had been in love for 3 years and married for 7. I understood perfectly the meaning of her reaction. I had torn away her outward calm and nervously asked, "When did this happen?" She froze for a moment, seemingly trying to think of an answer. Finally, she said, "Last summer. Grandma died, you went back for the funeral. I was in such pain, it took me a long time to recover. So you were lying when you said you had to go on a business trip. You chose to be with someone else when I was at my most miserable," I said angrily. "No wonder you said you were going on a week-long business trip, but you came back early, just in time for the funeral. I thought she was afraid of hurting me. It turned out to be a compensation for the guilt after cheating. It's really not what I thought." Emily was a little panicked. She quickly interrupted me. The words came out a bit messy. She explained anxiously, "No, I'm not lying to you. The business trip was real. But I know Grandma is very important to you. When you were so sad, I couldn't be there for you. It made me feel really bad, so I had a few too many drinks that night. He is my new assistant. I don't know how I got involved with him. It was that night. I was confused, really. Daniel, you believe me. This excuse also sounds like I'm shirking responsibility." I held back my tears and asked, "What about the baby? If it was just a drunken affair, why didn't you get rid of it?" Emily's face flushed red. It took a while for her to recover. I was under a lot of pressure at the time. By the time I noticed, I was 5 months pregnant. The doctor said if I had an abortion, it could be life-threatening. She paused. It seemed like she was thinking. I thought, "You can't have the baby anyway, so why don't we just treat this child as our own? That way you won't have to suffer so much. I'll give him some money, tell him to leave our lives." I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you saying that you cheated on me for my sake so that I would suffer less? And let another man have my child? Emily, do you really love me that much?" I cried and laughed. It looked a bit crazy, and it scared Emily. She looked at me in pain. The corners of her mouth trembled slightly. "Daniel, don't do this." "What should I do? Do I have to kneel down and express my gratitude to you?" Anger welled up in my heart. I shouted at Emily. Just then, a person dressed in pale blue suddenly appeared. Without saying a word, she was about to kneel down to me. "Daniel, don't blame Emily. She didn't mean it. After the baby is born, we won't be able to see each other anymore. You can trust me." Emily helped her up. She stood behind me and said to me in a pleading tone, "Daniel, no matter what happens, the baby is innocent." At this moment, the anger in my heart was even harder to quell. I thought to myself, these two people have clearly wronged me. Why have I become the bad guy? I suppressed my grievances and asked her, "Emily, do you really want this baby?" She didn't say anything, but her eyes were very determined. The answer was self-evident. Tears were about to fall. I bit my lip. I tried hard to hold back the tears. "Okay, Emily, I promise you, we'll get a divorce." I turned around and tried to leave. Suddenly, a darkness came over me. I fainted. In my last moments of consciousness, I heard Emily's desperate cries. When I woke up, I found myself in the hospital. Emily was holding my hand tightly and staring at me intently. It was as if I were the most precious thing in her heart. My mind flashed back to all the good times we had spent together. A pang of sadness welled up in my heart. Tears almost came to my eyes. She was my junior. On the orientation day, she took a liking to me as soon as she saw me and started actively courting me because I felt that there was a big age and family background gap between us. I kept rejecting her, but she never gave up. During the summer vacation of my junior year, I went to New York for an internship, but I got seriously ill and needed to be hospitalized. She actually learned about this news from somewhere. She was originally planning to travel abroad, but resolutely canceled the ticket and returned to New York. I woke up lying in a hospital bed. This is what I saw. She was holding my hand tightly. Her eyes were full of tears. She looked like a little puppy that had been hurt. When she saw me wake up, she said, choking back her sobs, "Daniel, don't ever make me worry like that again." I really couldn't take it. At the time, I thought this was a bit of an exaggeration. We had only just met. Why was it like it was a matter of life and death? But then she pressed her forehead against the back of my hand. In a moment, a hot drop of water fell on the back of my hand. Although it wasn't hot, I felt as if it was going to burn me. There's nothing more touching than the tears of a girl in her late teens or early 20s. After I was discharged from the hospital, I promised her she was so happy that she bought a truckload of roses and handed them out to every passerby. She just wanted a long and lasting blessing, saying that this would make our love even sweeter. After graduation, she couldn't wait to marry me. She said there were too many temptations out there. Only by marrying me could she feel at ease. We've been married for 7 years. Our relationship is still as sweet as when we first got together. I've never been able to have children because of a blocked vas deferens. She's never pressured me. She's also endured the pressure from her parents to have children on her own. She took all the blame on herself. I didn't want to make things difficult for her, so I endured the pain. I quietly treated myself, thinking of surprising her, unexpectedly. Back then, she said she was afraid of being tempted by too many things. She promised to marry me. 7 years after we got married, she still couldn't resist temptation. We were both speechless. There was a long silence. Emily looked away first. Then she said to me, "I'll go get the doctor. I'll also get the prescription." I was a little nervous. I was afraid she would find out that I was actually ready for the operation. I quickly stopped her. "Don't worry. Let's talk about the divorce first." Her body instantly froze. Tears fell like rain. She shook her head desperately as she held my hand. "Daniel, don't speak on impulse. I can see your eyes are red from crying. It really breaks my heart. In the past, whenever you cried, it always made me feel bad. But now, I just find it annoying." I stared at her coldly. "So you were with another man when I was at my lowest. Did you ever think that I couldn't handle it? You were looking forward to the birth of our child with him. Did you ever consider whether I could bear it?" Emily froze. It was as if she had been suspended in time. It took her a long time to finally speak. "But Daniel, I'm only human too. You have to give me the chance to make mistakes." HMPH. I looked at her with a cold smile. And then I said, "So I can make mistakes too. I can sleep with other women, let her get pregnant with my child, and then come back and let you think her child is yours." "Right," Emily immediately interrupted me and denied angrily, "Of course not." I looked at her coldly. For a moment she realized how ridiculous she looked. There was a moment of silence. Then she knelt down in front of my bed. "Daniel, Mom and Dad say they won't have any more children. They'll make me divorce you. I don't want to force you, but I really have no choice. This child is an accident, but this accident can save our marriage, you know that. I can't live without you." She said at the end. Her voice was choking. She held my hand tighter and tighter, as if she was afraid of losing me. Of course I knew she loved me. I was not blind. I could feel the depth of her affection in her eyes. Her care and love for me were hidden in the details of life. There was no need for me to verify them. When I turned over at night, she always instinctively held me close. This was true love. No matter what I said, she took it to heart. Every little thing she does to help me is done with the best intentions. No matter where I am, as long as I'm there, her gaze is always fixed on me. This is also a true expression of love. But because of this, our relationship can't tolerate any betrayal. I looked at her, slowly uncovering the cruelest truths. You really dare to say you don't have any feelings for him, of course. Emily answered very firmly. I closed my eyes, turned my head, and said slowly, "Then why do you still have his resume? We've known each other for so long. When have you ever been drunk? That time after the business trip, the phone never went silent. What on earth was going on? In recent months, you've been on business trips all the time. Where have you actually been?" With each question, Emily's face turned even paler. My heart followed suit and felt a little worse for wear. It suddenly occurred to me. I had seen that man before, a year ago. I went to Emily's company to deliver lunch and found a resume sitting on her desk by itself. The man on the resume had a bright smile. He looked cheerful. We were alumni. It was just that his major and work experience didn't quite match the job. Emily saw that I kept staring at the resume. Without saying anything, she took it from me. I also asked her if she planned to hire this guy, although he was an alumnus. He didn't seem to fit. She said it was recommended by the Human Resources Department. She was going to ignore it. When she said that, I didn't pay it much attention. From that day on, she really changed. She never talked about work at home before. Now she frequently answers work calls. Sometimes she even loses her temper on the phone. I can't help but laugh. I asked her what's going on, who made our normally mild-mannered Emily so angry. She paused for a moment, a little awkwardly. She said she'd hired a new assistant. It's not a big deal. She's just a bit sloppy. I nodded. From then on, she stopped answering the phone at home. I sleep lightly. After she started living with me, her phone was always on silent at night. But after that business trip, her phone has never been silent again. She went out several times in the middle of the night when she got a call. When I asked, she always said she was working overtime. In the following months, she went on business trips. I think the man accompanied her to the prenatal checkups. In fact, there were many loopholes. Now I look at the results again. I realize that there were actually signs of many things back then. I just didn't pay attention. When the veil of secrecy was completely lifted, there was a shocking trail of blood. Every drop was proof of my already broken marriage. Emily stood in front of me, pale as a sheet. Her mouth opened a few times, but she still couldn't speak. At that moment, the ringtone of her phone broke the strange silence. Emily glanced at the screen of her phone. Although she was a little panicked, she pressed the answer button. Everyone knew who was on the other end of the line. I turned my face away. I clenched my lips. I would never let myself show even a hint of pain again. It seemed like there was something said on the other end. Emily was a little annoyed. The tone was not very good. "Why are you not feeling well again? You come to me every time there is something wrong. Even if you really don't feel well, Auntie will take you to the hospital. I am not a doctor. There's no point in calling me." I looked at the woman in front of me. She hung up Michael's phone in front of me, but there was still a little unease in her expression. After all, that was the father of her child. After thinking about it, I got up and got out of bed. "Okay, I'll go with you to see him." When we were almost there, Emily was still persuading me not to go. I thought she was afraid that I would hurt Michael. But when I walked into the house, I realized what she was worried about. We put a lot of effort into decorating this place when we first moved in. It was full of my hopes and her hopes for our future life together. But now it looks like her life with another man is all over the place. Michael saw me. His smile froze instantly. He looked at Emily. His eyes were a little timid. It seemed like he was a little scared. Emily gave him a reassuring look. The two of them exchanged glances right in front of me. This scene made me feel a little tingly. I turned to Emily and said, "You go out first. I want to talk to Michael alone." Emily hesitated a little. Her face showed a look of uncertainty. I smiled and asked her, "What's wrong? Are you worried that I will hurt you?" Emily didn't want to say any more. But before she left, she insisted on correcting me. "You are the only one in my heart." Michael couldn't help but glance at me when he heard these words. Just that glance. I knew that my guess was right. "You joined the company. You must want to see Emily, right?" Michael froze for a moment. He nodded in acknowledgement. "So what? I love my senior by no less than you." I raised my eyebrows. Michael recalled his first meeting with Emily. It was 3 years ago. Emily returned to campus as an outstanding graduate to give a speech. Michael was responsible for receiving her, but he was so nervous that he knocked over his water glass. The water spilled. It ruined the expensive clothes she was wearing. Emily was not angry at all. Instead, she graciously diffused the awkwardness. From then on, Michael fell in love with her at first sight. A year later, the boy graduated. He knew in his heart that his major was not quite right, but he still sent his resume to the Johnson Group. You know what? The senior student actually remembered me. He said with a smile, she was happy to see me. She just said, so it was you. She was the one who insisted on keeping me at the beginning, but she treated me really well after that. When she found out she was pregnant, she was over the moon. This manor was originally meant to be for your future children, but she let me move in here. Our children will grow up here in the future. Do you really think she would break up with me? Michael looked at me with provocative eyes. It seemed he was expecting me to look sad. However, he was disappointed. Whether Emily had cheated mentally or not, the fact that she had cheated physically was a fact. This I absolutely cannot accept. Although it is difficult to let go, I have decided to speak up. In fact, I am not that naive. So I came here today to let you have Emily, as long as you are willing to cooperate with me. Michael looked at me suspiciously. I gave him a smile. I am not as casual as you. My woman must only have me in her heart. I don't want someone else in her heart. Michael wanted to continue talking, but he glanced over and suddenly smiled. Okay, senior, I believe you, but I want to be sure before I could react. He suddenly clutched his stomach. He crouched down in pain. Just then, someone behind me pushed me hard. My crotch hit the corner of the table hard. The pain made me gasp. It was Emily. Michael took her hand. He shook his head in pain. It wasn't Senior who pushed me. Don't blame him. Emily looked at me with disappointment. I was about to say something, but Emily's mother rushed over and pushed me away. I froze for a moment. I asked in surprise, Dad, Mom, why are you here? Emily's mother didn't have time to respond to me. She hurriedly ran to Emily, asking how her child was doing. Emily's father immediately slapped me. Dad, Emily immediately wanted to come over to protect me, but as soon as she heard Michael crying, she couldn't care about it and quickly pulled him away. She didn't even turn her head to look at me. Her father was so angry that he pointed at me and cursed, "You heartless person, you don't have any children of your own. How can you let Emily give birth outside? Do you want to cause the Johnson family to lose its future?" I was so shocked that I fell to the side after being slapped by him. It took a while for me to come to my senses. I swallowed the taste of blood in my mouth. I asked Dad, Mom, when did you know? Emily's mother said sternly, "We knew from the beginning, our Johnson family's grandson. How could we possibly hide it? I understand. So they knew all along, so they really are family. The 7 years I devoted to my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and the marriage I tried so hard to maintain, it was all a joke. I really couldn't take it anymore. I turned around and left this place that made me feel suffocated. I made an appointment for a vasectomy. Before the operation, I went to the ward to see Emily. She was sitting in front of Michael's bed, holding his hand tightly, comforting him softly. "It's okay. Everyone is fine. Our family of 3 will be fine." Her voice was getting more and more like it was 9 years ago, with a hint of choking. She said to me at that time, "Daniel, don't scare me. I really can't take it anymore." In the end, things have changed. I can't hold back anymore. Tears filled my face. Let it be a memorial to our nearly 10 years of love before the operation. I sent Emily the operation notice. Then I turned off my phone. Emily in the hospital room received a message. When she saw the content of the picture, her eyes widened. A strong fear welled up in her heart. Her fingers trembled. She tried to call Daniel's phone, but the prompt said it was turned off. Try again. It was still the same. She suddenly rushed downstairs without a care in the world, but she was too late. The word surgery was like a monster in her mind. It opened its mouth wide and tried to swallow her. Her legs went weak. She fell to her knees. Deep down, one thought became crystal clear. She and Daniel were really over. The operation didn't take long, but it felt like an entire century to Emily. Finally, the door opened. Daniel walked out wearing a hospital gown, looking very weak. Emily leaned against the wall and stood up. She staggered over to him, her eyes red. She asked, "How are you feeling?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Emily bent over. Suddenly, she looked 10 years older. "Daniel, you're so cruel." Daniel felt a little bad, but he kept his composure on his face. "Well, so we're getting divorced." Emily's face was full of pain. She hated Daniel's decisiveness, but when she saw his pale face, her heart ached again. She wanted to go to him and hug him. She just reached out her hand, But then her mother appeared. "Emily, come quickly. Michael is calling you." Emily turned around. She walked downstairs. Her hand went up, but then she let it drop. I just realized that I wanted to stop her, but I couldn't grab anything. A bitter smile crossed my lips. I turned around and left the hospital. I went home and packed my bags. I put the divorce papers on the table. Then I went to the airport. The moment Emily gave birth to her child, I was already on a plane flying high above the clouds. Emily had given birth to a son. Emily's father and mother were overjoyed. They were hugging their grandson and beaming with happiness. But Emily looked at the child. There was no smile on her face. The newborn baby was all wrinkly. It didn't look very good. She remembered the surgery slip for vasectomy reversal and couldn't help but start thinking, if it was her and Daniel's child, what would it look like? She imagined their child and what it would feel like in her heart. Would it be more joyful? She recalled just after the operation. Daniel's face was pale, looking very weak, but the look in his eyes was so determined it hurt her heart. After the operation, he returned to normal, but unrelentingly proposed to divorce her. It was really heart-wrenching, nearly 10 years of affection. Couldn't even earn a shred of compassion from him. She felt nothing but resentment. She especially hated Daniel's ruthlessness. She knew in her heart that she had no right to hate Daniel. Daniel came from a difficult family background. His parents divorced when he was very young. He grew up with his grandmother. He had experienced the hardship of growing up without parents. This had left a lasting impact on his views on child rearing. When they got married, Daniel told her about this. He had a blocked vas deferens and could not have children. He told her to think carefully about whether she really wanted to marry him. She agreed without hesitation. She said she would not make things difficult for him. However, those feelings of dread about parenting Daniel still found the courage to go to the doctor for her. That day he went to the eastern suburbs, thinking that he would soon be back to normal and be able to have children. Perhaps he wanted to check out the new house. But what were his feelings at the time? Full of anticipation, but found out that his wife was pregnant with someone else's child. What kind of mood would he be in? Emily remembers that day was windless. Daniel stood in front of her, nervous as if he would be blown away at any moment. She felt very uncomfortable at that time. She always thought she was just feeling scared and guilty because things had come to light. It wasn't until she saw Daniel's almost transparent pale face downstairs just now that she understood. The feeling of her heart being pulled was actually heartache. Her love for him was initially because she pitied him. That year at the welcome party, Daniel was one of the hosts. Backstage, two groups were arguing. When he went to mediate, he was suddenly elbowed by an excited male student. It hurt so much that his face changed. Emily was backstage at that time. She watched the skinny boy who was crying in pain but still endured it. Trying to mediate, her heart warmed. She really wanted to hug him into her arms and take care of him for the rest of her life. So many years have passed. Her feelings for him have never changed. It's just that after spending so much time together, she started to neglect him a little. Her parents' constant nagging about having children is tiring. Once again, her parents have mentioned their hope that she will have a child with another man. To continue the family line, she doesn't say anything. Her parents are both shrewd businessmen. Seeing her silence, they immediately sense that she may have acquiesced. Then she sees Michael's resume, which was specially selected. She understands almost instantly. This was arranged by her parents. She felt a little annoyed, but she wasn't as repulsed as she had expected. She suddenly realized this. She felt a little surprised. She hadn't been repulsed. She had originally planned to reject Michael outright, but just at that moment, Daniel came to bring her lunch. When he saw the resume that had obviously been specially selected, he curiously asked her if she wanted to hire the young boy. She casually gave a few evasive answers. Daniel didn't suspect anything. She suddenly changed her mind. After all, Daniel had a lot of trust in her. Michael was retained by her. The boy was actually quite clever. After sensing her indulgence towards him, he began to deliberately make small mistakes. Although they were all trivial mistakes, they could attract her attention. She also played with him. Daniel had discovered something before. Since then, she no longer answered his calls at home. At that time, she just wanted her parents to talk less, until Daniel's grandma died. Daniel's grandma was the one person she had always looked after. She knew how much of a blow it was for him. She should have gone back with him. She didn't expect her parents to send her on a business trip. It was quite important. And she had to go herself. The assistant who went with her was Michael. She knew in her heart that this was forcing her to choose. Daniel trusted her. When he heard that she had to go on a business trip, he told her on the phone, his voice choking with emotion. "Then go. Your parents and I will be there. I can handle it." Even though it was the most difficult time for him, he was still comforting her. But in her heart, she was already plotting with her parents how to hide the truth from him. For a moment, she really wanted to go to him, but she couldn't, because her parents had said if she didn't want to, she and Daniel would have to part ways. She thought to herself that if she went, although she didn't want to see Michael, she never imagined that Michael would drug her. After a night of craziness, she hadn't had time to react before she heard Michael's confession. He said he didn't want anything, he just liked her. Those sincere eyes, she had had them before. But now she had betrayed him. She ran away almost in a panic. She wanted to go to Daniel. Only in his arms did she feel at ease. Daniel didn't know the truth. Thinking that she had come back especially to see him, he was so moved that he shed tears. He didn't notice that she was actually very nervous. When she returned to the company, Michael didn't come to work. She didn't care. A month later, she returned to her parents' villa and told them that she was pregnant. Her parents were very happy. They decided to let Michael live in the mountain villa in the eastern suburbs. She didn't object. She just silently agreed. She was thinking to herself, the baby is here anyway, and her marriage to Daniel would be stable. Although they had decorated the house with great care, in fact, everyone knew in their hearts that they probably would never use it. She and Daniel still lived in the small two-bedroom apartment she had bought with her first earnings. This place held many fond memories for them. Originally, this relationship should have been very stable, because Daniel trusted her very much in the end. She felt that the only thing she had miscalculated was that she had never expected Daniel to be willing to have a child for her. He once told her, choking with emotion, "Emily, I can't have children. Are you sure?" But he had secretly undergone surgery. He had regained his fertility. He had wanted to surprise her, but in the midst of her joy, she had dealt him a heavy blow. How deep that pain was, so he had decided to let go. She really no longer belonged to him. She could see it in his eyes just now downstairs. She left almost in a panic. She was afraid that if she waited any longer, she would hear him say even more heartbreaking things. She shouldn't have left. He was still so fragile. How could she not be by his side? She had to go to him quickly. Maybe he would forgive her. She couldn't wait any longer. She wanted to rush out. But her parents stopped her. "Emily, you've just given birth. Why aren't you observing the confinement rules? Where do you think you're going?" She turns her head. She sees her parents scolding her. Michael is looking at her expectantly. She knows in her heart. This is not what she wants. She shakes her head. She says, "You wanted a child. Now I've given you one. Leave me alone after that." She turns around without hesitation. She is anxious to see Daniel. There is no time to wait for the elevator. Along the way, she kept calling, but the other person never answered. She was a little disappointed and decided not to call again. She thought to herself, it didn't matter if Daniel was angry with her. She just had to find a way to make him feel better. So she drove home, because she knew that Daniel would definitely not go anywhere else. She thought to herself, Daniel must be waiting under the covers for her to give him a kiss. But when she got home and opened the door, she found the house dark. Daniel was gone. She looked everywhere in the house, but she couldn't find him. Although his things were still there, she just couldn't feel his presence. No, she opened the closet. She saw the expensive clothes she had bought for him, but the few suits he usually wore were gone at that moment. An unprecedented wave of panic washed over her. She knew Daniel too well. She knew that his actions were sending her a clear signal. He had decided to part ways with her for good. She stood in front of her closet for a long time. Sadness gradually welled up in her heart. It was about to overwhelm her. Finally, she collapsed onto the bed, powerless. At that moment, she heard the sound of paper being squashed under her body. It was a divorce agreement and a note. It contained the last words Daniel left for her. "Emily, you once said that I was the only love of your life. That's why we got married. But I'm not anymore. Our marriage is meaningless. Just sign it." Tears keep falling. The ink slowly fades, just like the love between them that never came to fruition. Emily hasn't been out in a long time. She asks her friends. No one knows where Daniel has gone, so she tried to hide it, pretend that Daniel was still there. that he was just away on business. She had been in this situation before. She didn't go to see the children, and tried to pretend that she had never made a mistake. This self-deception seemed to have some effect. Life didn't seem to have changed much after work. There was no longer a light in the house for her. Sleeping at night was no longer a two-person affair. The things in the house were still the same as when Daniel was there, even the bouquet of flowers he bought before he left. She sprayed them with freshener. She wanted them to last a few more days. She was grateful that Daniel hadn't gotten rid of all this, so she could still remember him through these things. However, as time passed, she gradually realized Daniel was actually very cruel. The pair of gray slippers in the entrance hall, no one had worn them again. The white electric toothbrush on the sink had never been used again. The men's skincare products on the dressing table would never be used up. The moment the last eustoma in the vase withered, she completely broke down. She realized Daniel had abandoned her. It felt like all the air had been let out of her. She didn't go to work. She didn't go out. Every day she just drank at home, getting drunk, until she started bleeding from her stomach. Her parents took her to hospital. Otherwise, she might not have survived. Lying in the hospital bed, she looked at Michael, who was crying inconsolably while holding their child, and at her parents, who kept blaming her. Suddenly, she understood. I have to go find Daniel. She made up her mind. No matter how far away, she had to find him and beg for forgiveness. When I arrived at the airport, I actually had no idea where I was going. I went to the staff and asked them what flights were still available. The staff listed a few places. One of the names made me freeze. Slovenia. The name of this place is quite special. It is the only country in the world that puts love in its name. It is also the place I went to when I first went abroad. It is also the place where Emily proposed. There are a lot of good memories here. We rode on Lake Bled. We hung love locks engraved with our names on the love bridge. We climbed those unknown hills like monkeys. We fell asleep in a romantic hotel, holding each other tightly. I still remember the little prank we played in the French-style ladies' toilet in the countryside. There were really a lot of first times and rebellious things that happened here. I have to say, in a way, Emily changed me. I hesitated for a second, but I decided to come back. The purpose of this revisit is not to dwell on old wounds, but to slowly forget those memories, seeing familiar places. I thought I would feel sad, but strangely enough, as I walked the streets of Ljubljana again, I felt a sense of freedom and peace. I thought I was too young and ignorant before. I thought being loved by one person for the rest of your life was the most important thing. In fact, the most important thing should be the pursuit and yearning for freedom. Through this kind of travel, I found joy and decided to start my journey around Europe. I really have to thank Emily. She has been taking care of me all these years, helping me with my food, accommodation, and transportation. I basically saved up all the money I earned. She also deposited a lot of money into my account every month. Now I have some savings. I can meet my own needs. I stayed in Slovenia for 2 months. During that time, I only thought of Emily once. I casually browsed through my moments. I saw a status posted by Emily's mother. My grandson is 1 month old. Her happiness was evident. I clicked on the photo and looked at it carefully. After looking at it for a long time, I didn't think the child looked much like Emily. Then I suddenly thought, if Emily and I had a child, what would it be like? I don't know if the baby is a boy or a girl. Will it look like me or like its mother? Thinking about this, I suddenly stopped. I quickly deleted Emily's parents, and all of our mutual friends. Then I hurriedly went to the next place. What I didn't realize was that while I was traveling around Europe, Emily was also exploring the continent. When she decided to come and find me, she had a feeling in the pit of her stomach. She was sure I would be in Europe. I had told her more than once that I hoped to travel around Europe with her one day. Europe was so big, she didn't know where to start looking. She pretty much ruled out Slovenia right away. That's where he proposed. It's also where we had some of our best memories. She felt like she knew me so well. She thought I resented her. That's why I didn't want to go back there. She thought the first stop was Serbia. I had told her before that I wanted to settle down in a wine town there and live the life of a wine drinker. Because of this idea, we never saw each other again. In fact, we almost ran into each other. It was at Bergamo Airport. I was about to change planes to Croatia. Because of the tight schedule, I was rushing all the way. Emily had just got off the plane and was planning to hitch a ride to Milan. As she exited the airport, she got a call from her mother. She learned that her father had suffered a sudden heart attack. The situation was very urgent. Emily immediately bought a ticket to return home. While checking in, her heart suddenly began to race. It felt as if she could sense the presence of the person in her heart. She couldn't wait to see him. She stopped abruptly. She looked around, but she didn't see a familiar figure. She lowered her head in disappointment, and just like that, she passed me in the crowd. She had to go back and face her responsibilities. As for me, I no longer intended to wait for her. In the end, I returned to Slovenia. I bought a flower shop here. I have settled down. That year, Emily's father suddenly had a heart attack. He did not survive. After Emily took over the company, the past 7 years have been like a robot. The new employees have hardly seen her smile. Everyone wonders how the old employees can bear it. An old employee who had worked at the company for more than 10 years let out a deep sigh. Back when Daniel was still here, Emily was not like this. I saw Emily hugging Daniel many times. They were very affectionate. The new employee asked curiously, "So why doesn't Daniel come now?" The old employee didn't respond. Then a voice suddenly came from behind. "He went on a trip abroad." When she turned around, the usually cold Emily was standing behind her. She actually had a gentle expression on her face. She turned to the old employee and asked tenderly, "Have you ever seen me flirt with Mr. before?" I never noticed what Mr. S. expression was like at that time. The old employee looked as if he had seen a ghost. He hesitated for a long time before speaking. We were standing too far away. I couldn't see clearly either. But from Mr. S.'s gentle actions, I think he was wearing a smile. Hearing this, Emily's tears could not help but well up. She smiled and asked, "Really? So I was that happy back then?" But then, she destroyed that happiness herself. After work, she returned to her home with Daniel. Michael was at the door again. He was crying and rushing towards Emily. "Emily, I beg you, please take a look at Tommy." He said, "He's sick. He's crying for his mother." Emily didn't show any emotion when she heard this. Instead, she coldly pushed Michael's hand away. Then she wiped the place he had touched with a handkerchief. He had Grandma by his side, and the best caregiver and aunt, and you, Daddy, missing my motherly love. It doesn't affect him much, if you want to live well. It's best not to let me see you again in the future," she finished. Then she was about to turn around and leave. That year, after Daniel left, she saw everything that happened that day on the surveillance camera, and she realized that he had misled Daniel, made him feel that she had changed her heart. Although she lied to Daniel, it was obvious that she had betrayed herself, but took it out on Michael. She gave him and the child a chance to live a good life. That was all she could do. Beyond that, she didn't want to have anything more to do with them. Michael watched her go, angrily shouting, "Tommy is your child. Do you really have the heart to do this? Back then you couldn't control yourself. As a result, you had this child. Isn't that what you tacitly agreed to in your heart? Now you're pretending to be innocent. Who are you trying to fool?" Emily clenched her keys. Her hand relaxed again in an instant. "You're right. None of us are innocent. So we all have to bear the consequences. We should all lose the people we love, living with guilt and pain." Michael really felt desperate over the years. He had tried many methods. Just let her and her son take a look. But it didn't work. She was still as calm as usual. Just when he thought he would never see Emily show any emotion again in his life, Emily suddenly answered the phone. She hurried downstairs. All these years, she had never given up looking for Daniel. Just now, a friend called her. She said she had seen someone who looked a lot like Daniel in a flower shop in Slovenia. As soon as Emily heard this, she immediately became anxious. All these years, she had been to many places, but she had never dared to go to this place. She thought Daniel would never come here. Unexpectedly, he actually showed up at the place where she proposed. Does that mean that all these years, he was actually waiting for her? As soon as this thought came to her, she immediately got moving. She asked her assistant to book the fastest flight to Slovenia for her as soon as she landed. She rented a car and went straight to the flower shop. Her friend told her that the flower shop was in the small town of Purin because the owner is handsome and a nice person. Plus, the store only sells lisianthus, so it's especially famous. Emily listened. A pang of sadness welled up in her heart. Lilies of the valley are Daniel's favorite flower. He said he likes the flower language of lilies of the valley. It represents eternal love, just like them. When he said this, everyone's faces looked happy. Unexpectedly, happiness came so briefly. However, she still has a chance to make up for it. The moment she saw the flower shop, he felt a little uneasy. It felt like going back to his hometown. She stepped on the brake, driving slowly, hoping to use this time to adjust her state of mind. Suddenly, she saw Daniel walk out. They hadn't met for so many years. He looked even more handsome. His body exuded a calm and elegant temperament. The moment she saw him, she almost couldn't catch her breath. But the next second, she saw a woman walk out of the shop. The woman skillfully took the flower bucket from Daniel's hands. The two of them smiled at each other. They understood each other without saying a word. Suddenly, she looked stunned. At that moment, a car sped up from the right. She didn't have time to dodge. They say that before a person dies, memories of the past will flash through their mind. Emily realized in the last moments of her life that her love for Daniel was so deep. They hadn't seen each other for 7 years, but his image was ever present in her mind. She could remember every expression and movement, but now she could never hold him in her arms again. She tried to reach out through the broken car window, but she could never quite reach him, just like that year in the hospital. She had reached out to Daniel, but then she had withdrawn her hand. She would never know. If she had waited just a second longer, Daniel would have reached out to her. Some things, once lost, can never be found again. Julia is the girlfriend of Matt, an employee at Daniel's store. She comes to pick up her boyfriend from work every day. She also helps out. Since they are both Chinese, Daniel and she got along quickly. This day, they had just finished collecting the last bucket of flowers. Suddenly, there was a loud noise from the street in the distance. Julia looked up at Daniel and said, "There's been a car accident. That road has always been a place with frequent accidents." Daniel's heart tightened. He remembered that there had been several traffic accidents before. Although he felt a little sad, there was nothing he could do. He nodded in agreement. Yes, the ambulance had already arrived. There was nothing he could do to help. He could only pray silently for the unlucky car owner. "I hope you're safe." He returned to the shop. No matter what, the flower shop would be open as usual tomorrow.